Hey there, and welcome to another installment of the Offset Podcast. This week, we're talking about DCTLs, OFX, and how they fit into your grading workflow. Stay tuned.
This podcast is sponsored by Flanders Scientific, leaders in color-accurate display solutions for professional video. Whether you're a colorist, an editor, a DIT, or a broadcast engineer, Flanders Scientific has a professional display solution to meet your needs. Learn more at flandersscientific.com.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Offset Podcast. I am Robbie Carmen, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime, Joey DeAnna. Joey, how you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you?
I am pretty good. I'm pretty good. We are here in episode 27, or depending on how you count it, this would be, I don't know, our third or fourth episode of season 2, here in 2025. And it dawned on me that we have not talked at all about something that is, if you've been hiding under a rock, you probably don't know about, but everybody else in the grading world does, and that is, the discussion of DCTLs and OFX and how they fit into grading workflow. I think over the past, maybe 5 or 6 years, DCTLs in particular have become a little bit of a cottage industry, right?
Yeah.
What started as a way to kind of enhance some functionality, specifically in DaVinci Resolve. We'll talk about what DCTL means and all that stuff in just a second. There's a lot of choices out there. There's a lot of options. There's a lot of people making these tools now. And I think in this episode today, we wanted to kind of just explore where, DCTLs and, the next step above OFX, where they kind of fit in a grading workflow. Are they right for you? Some things to like about them, some things to be concerned about, some things to pay attention to. So I think it's going to be a fun chat. But before we do that, of course, just some housekeeping. You can always go over to offsetpodcast.com and check out additional show notes on the show. You can follow us on YouTube or the various social media platforms. You can scan this little QR code at the bottom of the screen here to get all the different ways to listen and to watch. And just remember, wherever you find the show, just do us a favor, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and tell your colleagues. Every little bit helps, so we really appreciate it. All right, so Joey, let's dive into this topic. I guess the first place that I want to kind of begin, and I always use you for definitions, so we'll continue that trend. What is a DCTL? Let's start there, and then also, what is OFX? What are those two different things?
Let me go from the very kind of top of this concept, and let's just put all of this together in the bubble of what I'm going to call third-party tools, right? Our primary grading software, in our case, is DaVinci Resolve, but this will apply to any other grading software that is expandable via other third-party tools. Sure. Has its own set of features, then has abilities to expand those features. So in DaVinci Resolve, you've got 3 kind of main ways you can expand the functionality. The first is what's called a power grade, which is essentially a saved preset node tree. Everything's built with native tools in Resolve, but you can build really advanced structures that break up different parts of the images, different channels, do different color management, to the point where you would never want to build that yourself. And there are people that will sell you or distribute free or for a small cost, whatever, various power grades of preset settings that you can then go in and edit and tweak to your liking that are great for a lot of workflows. Then there is the DCTL, the DaVinci Color Transform Library. This is an interesting one because it actually evolved out of ACES. ACES is the open source color management tool that we all know and love, but to handle those color space transforms with, programmable math and as opposed to a lookup table, they developed a color transform language, which is essentially a very C-like compiled language that runs on your GPU and at its very core takes 1 pixel triplet of RGB values as floating point numbers and outputs another one, a new one, a replacement one. Functionally very similar to a LUT, but with much more programmability because you can do anything from, tone mapping to bringing in some spatial elements because you know which pixel number it is. And then what Blackmagic did is they kind of took that to another level and allowed you as the DCTL programmer to add sliders and interface inputs, right? A
Oh,
normal
even
ACES CTL.
even create on-screen stuff too, right? Like you could have
Yeah,
it
that's what I
overlay
mean. You
and
can
stuff like that.
create a
Yeah,
user interface to
yeah,
change values, whereas the base ACES CTLs take in one color space, output a different color space. You don't really have a lot of flexibility. It's not a grading tool, it's a technical transform.
sure.
The custom DCTLs that you either write yourself or buy or get however you get, there's a lot of free ones out there as well. Uh, those can present a user interface in DaVinci Resolve, kind of like the next kind of step up, which is the plugin. OpenFX is a standard plugin system that works on various applications and essentially lets you write your own full software that accesses the image in your host software. So if you're in Resolve, Premiere, After Effects, Fusion, at its core, there's an image. Your OpenFX that you either buy or write can access that image and give the software back another image, but you can have your own completely bespoke user interface. It opens up in its own window. You can have it use other libraries. You can have it do all. It's essentially writing a full-fledged additional piece of software that is accessible within your grading software, which is what's called the host application.
Yeah,
So
no, that makes
all
sense.
of these things are kind of different levels of functionality, and they all kind of have the same idea of here's something that isn't easily one click built into Resolve. Here's a way you can implement it.
Yeah. So I want to start back at the top at the power grids thing, because I think that there's a not every I have to say this. I guess not everybody utilizes power grades, right? Like, so I think
Yeah,
like
or they make their own power grades, save their own presets. But
yeah,
something we've seen pretty recently in the industry is a couple of groups. The big one that comes to mind is our friend Jason Bodak and Pixel
yeah,
Tools. He developed a whole bunch of really great power grades that you buy as a package,
yep.
and they not only work as presets for the more novice user, they work as a interactive tutorial almost as well, because everything's built out of the native tools.
Right, because so in that case, in that case, he's done something. Let's just say he has a one with 10 nodes in it, right? And he'll do things like, hey, this node is called exposure. This is the one I want. It's ready to do that. On this one is called whatever, and it kind of walks you through like the steps of it. And it also, I think those for sale power grades also get people exposed to different methodologies for building node trees for different organization stuff. And like I've always found like I can't say honestly that I use a ton of third-party power grades, but I think the thing for me that is useful to look at them is I never thought about organizing that way, or I never thought about breaking these things up into that part of it. And so, after taking a look at some of those, I've utilized, because like I honestly have used power grades more as a glorified copy and paste operation, for me, right? Like if I'm doing a series and there's a host that appears in one show, I'll save a power grade. Then the next show that pops up, I can just apply that same, correction kind of thing, right? So that's one way of using them. But like Jason and his team, they have various scenarios. Maybe there's some of them are looks, some of them are more technical and in shape. But I did want to clarify one thing that you said earlier about power grades too. It's like a power grade could contain a DCTL or an OFX in it,
Sure.
right? Right. It's just part of the node tree. But I get conceptually what you're saying. It's a different container.
Yeah, and one thing that we're going to definitely talk about kind of later on in the episode is some of the disadvantages of some of these workflows is that when you get outside of the native tools, there are implications to that. A power grade, while being less capable because you're limited to what the internal tools in Resolve can do, is also very, very, very portable because any Resolve anywhere can open up the project, doesn't need access to the original power grade file because you've used it, it's in your node tree, right? Doesn't need to install anything, doesn't need any kind of activation or license. It is the most simple, portable way to drop in some new functionality, but because of that, it's also the most limited, right? You can't do some of the stuff that we're going to talk about with some of these other tools.
Yeah, no, and one more thought before we move on about DCTLs versus OFX. One of the things, and we're fortunate enough to know a lot of these DCTL type programmers, and I think they'll all universally tell you, that the reason that they're not in OFX is because there's this level of complexity that ratchets up pretty exponentially when you
Oh yeah.
go from, so if power grade's the lowest end of the food chain, right? And you go, then OFX is the opposite end. There's a big jump in knowledge, skill, coding, programming language, whatever, to go from DCTL to OFX, because then you start dealing with things like, oh, well, I'm going to deal with processor optimization and GPU optimization and all those libraries. And oh, well, I'm using this for my user interface versus this code base. It gets a whole lot more complicated really quickly. And I think that, there's a reason that you haven't seen a lot of the DCTL type folks make that jump to OFX, because it does, pretty much require, somebody who's not a hobbyist, but is a
Yeah, it's writing a whole application.
right.
If you want to make a simple lift gamma gain DCTL, it's literally 6 lines of code.
Right.
3 for the user interface lines, 3 for the lift and the gamma and the gain. Like,
right.
it's so simple.
Yeah.
And yeah, you get into trying to write OFX, then you got to do your own user interface. You got to do a lot.
Yeah. So, in my estimation, I think that this ecosystem is one that, I have to say it's a little dizzying to keep up with, because it seems like every other day somebody's releasing, a new power grade package, a new DCTL package. And
this is the best saturation DCTL this week.
Right. It's like at a certain point, how many, of the same overlapping type tools can you have? But I get it. People have slightly different approach to the math, slightly different approach to the, the UI interface. Some people have really cool, cute little emoji icons next to their sliders, like whatever it may be, right? But I think, the bigger picture part of this discussion, now that we define these things, is like, where do these tools fit in kind of your grading workflow? And I'll give you my opinions about this first, then let's hear yours. So to me, it got to a point, especially in a tool like Resolve, that's, gosh, we're about to be on version 20 or whatever they're going to call it. And, it's a rather mature set, application set. And as such, I think the developers, Blackmagic, whoever, are a little apprehensive about, like, hey, we're not going to reinvent the whole wheel here in the UI. And, and it's already a pretty crowded application to begin with. So I think this kind of started off as like, hey, guess what? We Blackmagic, I'm speaking in the royal we now, we're gonna start this off by creating a whole bunch of these OFX and the DCTLs and all that kind of stuff, so we can enhance the workflow that we don't necessarily want to or able to put into the main part of the UI, right? And I think initially that was a little confusing to users, because, like, I'll give you one example. So if you don't have any third-party tools, just rely on Blackmagic, you go into that, open up that OFX tab, and you're like, oh, okay, there's some cool stuff here. Probably don't need light rays all that often, but that's cool. And then you see something like, well, there's noise reduction here, but there's also noise reduction down here, right? And then you look at something like, I'm just picking one out of a hat, contrast pop, right? And you're like, oh, cool, contrast pop. And then you realize all that contrast pop is just literally a contrast, like a preset essentially for contrast, adjustment. I mean, I'm simplifying that, but like there was a lot of overlap, right? And so I think initially this was like, hey, let's, kind of replicate or enhance a little bit some of the built-in functionality. But then when third-party people started getting involved, I think that's when different stuff started taking off. And I'll give you my first example of each. First example of DCTL was, I mean, probably 9 years ago. I was looking for a false color kind of thing, right? And I found somebody with a DCTL false color thing to judge exposure. Perfect example of extending my grading workflow and extending that functionality, right?
If you recall, before it existed in any other tool, we use my custom blanking detection DCTL for nonfiction docs forever.
Right. And then I feel like my first exposure to the OFX side was I had been a user of Neat Video prior to its introduction as an OFX, and then when it came out as an OFX, I was like, oh God, we have Neat now, and so that's a whole, as everybody probably knows, that's its own standalone application, own UI, does wonderful things. So I mean, to me, it was initially about just extending my workflow for things that weren't readily available in the main UI
Hmm.
of Resolve. Where it's changed for me, I think recently is that, we talked about power grades earlier. I've started incorporating some of these things into my normal node trees, my own power grades, and I have them like it feels much more just like a part of my grading approach now, rather than something that I add on occasionally when I need it, because I set up my fixed node trees to have some of this functionality already built in, right? Like I have a node that has regular resolve noise reduction, and then I have a node that already has, say, neat video dropped on it, right? I have one tree that has, we'll talk about this a little later, but I have a plugin from our friend Colin Kelly called Contour that just sits on a node and I can turn it on and off, right? So I've gotten, like, to me, it's become a little more integrated now that I've combined the extended functionality with something that we've done for years, and that is, fixed node tree structure, that kind of stuff. It becomes a little bit more integrated, I should say.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, there was a big transition in the mentality of how Blackmagic adds features to Resolve. I remember it well. It was version 14 came out, and they had
Face
like
refinement?
20 new built-in
Yeah.
OFX that everybody was like, "Well, why isn't this a new pane in the software?" Well, because you'd have a billion panes in the software, and now you can just put this anywhere in your node tree. It's an element that you can use inside your bigger grading pipeline. And I think that evolved out of the fact that, people used to do, the early days of Resolve, node structures were in general pretty freeform. People would
Yep.
build it as they wanted,
Yep.
and they were usually pretty simple because the hardware capabilities to run massive, complicated node structures just weren't there.
Right.
And at that point, having a bunch of these plugins that you would just drop into the node tree would seem kind of odd, especially because if you look at the Resolve UI of very early versions, the nodes were much bigger. The node tree was much smaller. It was not made for this kind of dynamic. I'm going to drop in this OFX. I'm going to drop in this effect and put them in this order. It's improved leaps and bounds over those early days to where these tools really do fit in to a modern grading workflow. And for me, yeah, there's a few that I consider to be pretty essential. Neat video, definitely being one of them, and a
Yeah.
few DCTLs to be one of them. I do have a node in my fixed node structure that is just a DCTL node that is
Yeah, that way
blank.
you can pull up
So
whatever
I
you
could
want.
pull up any
Yeah.
DCTL without having to drag the effect on there. But, all of these kind of expansions of the native software come with risks and benefits, right?
Yeah, but before we get to that, I just want to mention one more thing about this general development. Two more things. One, I can't tell you. I think that I can't tell you enough or stress this enough that I think the benefits to the greater color grading community, even if they're not on Resolve, even if they're on Baselight or whatever, using OFX tools there or whatever. I just think this general move to, let's just say, the democratization, to overuse a term, of coding for this type of thing is
Yep.
really exciting, because it used to be, right, that you just were force fed whatever the developers of the application that you're using gave you, and that was that. Yeah, you could file bug reports, you could be like, oh, this doesn't work, or I want it to work like that, new features. But for the first time that I can, in the 30 years that I've been using creative software, this is the first time I can really remember that, like, if I can think about a tool and I can conceptualize it and I can, have the ability to code it, I can pretty much make a version of it, like, pretty simply with DCTL tools. And if I really wanted to push myself and learn some new skills, some new libraries, new, languages or whatever, I could maybe force myself into the OFX land. And I think that's a really big paradigm shift for creative software that I'm actually surprised that more editorial tools, graphic design tools, those kind of things don't really have yet,
Yeah.
because it's just sort of like, we've seen it. We have friends that are smart enough. They're like, hey man, I just made 30 DCLTLs to do all these things I want to do. And that's a really big benefit that I think is easy to overlook about this kind of boom versus older things.
Yeah,
And then,
because in creative software, we've always had the highest level, right? Plugins where they're writing whole applications.
yeah,
Blackmagic specifically has made it super easy to do almost all of that with way less code and way
well,
less hassle.
and I think the second part, semi-related to that, and then we'll move on to some of the pitfalls of these tools, is I actually think it's a brilliant R&D move by the
Oh yeah.
developers at Blackmagic, right? So they can sit back in their comfy office chairs and down in Singapore, right? And just click on the internet and see, oh, that person's doing, oh, that's really cool. We like that. But guess what? We have the resources and the expertise to take that idea. And I'm not saying they're stealing ideas. Please don't take it that way. But to look at the ecosystem and inform that product design to the next level, right?
Yeah. So I mean, having the flexibility that Resolve has specifically is on all fronts a very good thing. But flexibility has its own inherent
Yeah.
disadvantages and
Totally.
pitfalls and workflow issues that I think we need to be really cognizant of. There are a billion awesome DCTLs and plugins out there, and you can get overwhelmed and I'm going to try the latest and greatest, newest thing that this guy put on GitHub and put that on my DCTL and grade a whole project with that. And this is awesome, right? So why would you not do that? What are the disadvantages? How can you mitigate them?
I have a lot of reasons.
How do you not paint yourself into a corner of absolute misery? Because you can.
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear some of your, because you're a little more technical about some of these things, but yeah, let's go. Let's dive into this because there's some really good reasons not to.
So for me, there has to be, if I'm going to use a DCTL or a plugin
Yeah.
in any workflow, it has to be compelling enough that I'm going to install it on 3 different systems here, on Robbie's system and our system at the office, which means every time it's updated, we need to make sure we're on the same version in 5 different places at once.
Yep.
Right. And every time it's updated, that means we need to test it on minimum 3 different platforms. No, 4 different platforms, right? Mac ARM, Mac Intel, Windows Intel, Linux Intel. Okay.
Yep.
We use all of those.
And that's amplified exponentially, by the way, with OFX, because the OFX, again, as we said earlier, rely on a lot more external libraries and a lot more in-depth code, to put it simply.
And all of these disadvantages are triple for OFX, because just from a user perspective, okay, we do a clever thing, I think, which is in our general syncing workflow of all our projects, we also sync a shared LUT folder, which then has the DCTLs in it. So when we install a new DCTL, it syncs to everywhere. We just need to kind of test it to make sure there's no issues on one particular machine. Plugins, on the other hand, OFX, there's no easy way to do that. They install differently for every product. Some might say, just drop the OFX bundle in your system OFX folder. Some might have a full installer. Some might need online updates, which is a whole other nightmare. For example, we cannot use, we use Topaz a little bit, but only as an external application, because Topaz phones home every time you open it. And our main, at least my main workstation, is completely off the internet. So using Topaz in a project as an OFX is a complete no-go for our workflow, because it needs to phone home incessantly.
I'll tell you about even one of these even super than that in the OFX side of things. I had a couple of weeks ago, I don't know, I was just, had some downtime, and I was like, oh, I should upgrade version of Resolve. I should upgrade, desktop video. So I did all that. And then I was like, oh, look, there's an update to like Film Convert available, right? So I installed, and I can't remember the version numbers or whatever, but I installed an update to Film Convert, and it was a big enough version that it actually necessitated like an upgrade fee or something. It was something like that. Anyway, I had a like on a so I did that on like a Friday afternoon. Monday morning comes around, client calls. He's like, "Hey, we just got some QC notes back. Can you go and re-output like a couple patches, QC patches?" And I didn't realize that I had used Film Convert for the grain in a couple spots, but because I had upgraded on that system, I rendered out, re-delivered the whole show, and embarrassingly didn't watch the patches down before I posted them. Got a note back that said, "Why is there this watermarking on all these shots about something about Film Convert?" Right? I'm like, oh, Christ. Like, so it's like stuff like that, right? That if you're not paying
Yep.
attention to, you have a legacy version of a plugin. There might even be like differences in terms of like actual output as you go from a version to another version too.
Now, the good thing is a lot of these plugin developers are very cognizant of that one. They can't do anything about the logistics of
Right,
installing
sure.
on multiple systems, licensing on multiple systems. That's going to be a hassle no matter what. But to not throw our friends at Film Convert under the bus, because I think they do have a very compelling product.
Yeah, it's good.
When they do upgrades that change the output, even if it's in a small way, it installs parallel with the version number. So when you
Oh
go
yeah,
back to an old
those,
project, it keeps the old one. That's the biggest danger, is if you upgrade a third-party tool and then you open a legacy project and now your output is different. That is
yeah, and they'll scream that from the mountains too. And actually, the devs in the Black Magic have done something similar now, where you get the
they
legacy,
do that with all their internal tools.
yeah, where you get the legacy tag on something if it's an older version of a transform or something like that.
But it's just another thing. When you start using these tools, again, as wonderful as they can be, those are what you need to look out for workflow wise, is version numbers, changes in outputs, different platforms, and making sure, okay, your license didn't expire, or
Yeah.
some other licensing issue where you get caught kind of with your pants down because you thought everything was fine, but something has changed and it's not something in the core Resolve software, so you weren't really thinking about it.
Yeah, and with one more thing about OFX in particular too, is that I have been caught with my pants down a couple times with not so much on Mac, because the GPU part of that is kind of integrated just into the OS, but on Windows I've had issues where like, oh, I've updated my NVIDIA drivers on a card and now the plugin doesn't work anymore, right? Because it's like it's so tied into specific
And if
driver
you use that
versions.
plugin on one shot in a 1,000-shot show, and then you need to do a re-output late night on a Friday, you might not think about it, and you might get yourself into an accidental QC embarrassment.
And the last thing I'll say on that same vein is, while more and more people are using Linux, because Blackmagic said, "Hey, we're available on Linux," um, a lot of the developers thinking about these, especially about OFX, but also some of the DCTLs. There are peculiarities of Linux that a lot of people don't really pay attention to, or at the best case, they don't update the tools for Linux as often as they would.
And in a
for-
lot of cases, OFX developers just skip the Linux version.
Right, exactly. So, like, if you're stuck on Linux, that's an extra level of
Stuck on Linux if you're privileged enough to be on Linux.
So, to me, I got to tell you my two biggest pitfalls about these tools. Number one is that I find when I use these tools getting frustrated very quickly by the number of steps and clicks.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I want to, let's for a second forget that I have a saved node tree with one of these sitting on a node or whatever. But let's just say I'm starting from scratch, right? Well, I have to create the new node. I have to open up the effects tab, or right. In the case of a DCTL, I have to add the DCTL plugin or whatever. Then I have to choose from the list. Then when I have the DCTL loaded, I now have this nice huge long laundry list of sliders and knobs that I have to then kind of adjust. And so like to get there, the initial get there is asking a lot sometimes for all those clicks. But related to me is that when I'm on a panel like you are, and whether it's the big panels or the mini panel or whatever, when I'm grading on a panel, like for the most part, I've built up this muscle memory where it's like, okay, here's my lift gamma gain, here's my contrast, here's my saturation, whatever. Frustratingly, I find to use these tools now, there are good mappings for the panels, right? Like you can control a lot of parameters of these DCTLs and OFX on panels. but it's the same thing for me. It's a lot of clicks to get there. Like,
Yep.
I'm sure there's actually probably a faster way to do this, but I'm just looking over my shoulder here at a panel, and I'm thinking, okay, well, if I want to use that DCTL, I got or whatever, I got to go users. Then what I got to make like 4 clicks to make that happen. And honestly, you do that enough over the course of a day or a week or a month or a year or whatever, it's a lot of time spent clicking around, and it wears on you.
Absolutely. And besides all the other logistic things, that is kind of my number one reason to gravitate towards using native tools whenever possible. It is the 1,000 shot, 1,500 shot show where you're going through and it's a jam-packed session. You're getting things done quickly. You're not sitting on a shot for a long time, tweaking individual things in great detail. Those are the situations where these third-party tools maybe don't fit the workflow, and that's fine. But where they really do fit in is really heavily graded or affected short form projects like promos, where you might be going in and doing incredible detail and needing these very specialized added tools, building bespoke node trees just for that shot, just going into more depth and more clicks per shot because you might have 15 shots versus 1,500.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. The other thing I was thinking about, as we were riffing on what to, add to this episode was, I know that you have very, very, how should I say, detailed and completist opinions about UI, specifically when it comes to the Resolve UI. You think all of the requests for floating windows, panels, customization, all that kind of stuff, those people should just shut up and it's great and take what spoon fed you, right? And for the most
100%.
For the most part, I see the logic in what you're saying, and I tend to agree. It brings some uniformity. There's a lot of things I think the Resolve team could do on the UI, but this is the one area where I think, let me just bear with me for a second. I think combines a little bit of that custom ability with maybe not offending your sensibility over the fixed part about this, and that is, I would love to see the developers carve out a place in Resolve, one single panel pane, and I'm going to suggest to them that it's the info palette at the bottom right of the main the color page, right? Because I don't know. I mean, occasionally I go over to the info the palette, but like not really, right? It seems kind of wasted space. I would love for the ability to, air quotes here, dock some 1, 2, 3 or something like that, favorite OFX interface or OFX or DCTL interfaces, dock that to part of the main Resolve UI so they're always in view, so I can click a button or click with one mouse, just like I would go to the curves or go to Magic Mask or something like that. Go to that tool and have it always be in focus without having to do the 27 click jumps to load it up and get it there.
I would love that. And that actually brings me back to reminiscing about my sweet, wonderful Avid DS that is long gone. In DS, if you hit F2, it would bring up a temporary pop-up window. And from there, you could drag on any saved effect and any saved set of properties. And then what would happen is, no matter where your mouse was or your pen, so if you were hovered over a node in a node tree, you hit F2, the little pop-up comes up exactly where your cursor is. You grab any tool from it and either click it to add it or just drag it off into your node tree.
It's like a clipboard.
And then the little F2 panel just goes away, gets out of your way.
Something like that, something like the fixed, part of the UI where you can dock things, like something like that would make it so much more functional to me, because it's just sort of like I could get rid of the 400 clicks to get to a starting point.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, right, we deal in muscle memory more than anything else. And when you get into these third-party tools, that muscle memory kind of goes out the window, which in my view makes them less desirable for fast-paced, complicated, long-form sessions.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about that I think, is an aggravating thing about this is that I think that I think that there are some really good DCTL and OFX developers, and then I think there's, and I'm not pointing fingers, but there's a subset that are opportunists, right?
Oh yeah.
And one of the challenges I think that you'll find in this is finding tools that are actually well optimized. There are plenty of tools out there, but optimization, and I mean optimization in a couple different ways, performance, playback, that kind of stuff, but
But also
also
not breaking your image.
breaking your image, right? I think there's a lot of these tools out there that, on the surface they seem really cool, and then you dive into practical use and they turn out that they have really kind of limited functionality, or if you push it they start tearing apart the image and the stuff like
And
that.
that's where, again, you get into that 1,000-shot show where I just fell in love with this new effect. I'm going to use it as a base part of this look. And then you get 500 shots in, and then you find a shot that completely breaks it, and there's
you
nothing
painted
you can
yourself
do.
you painted yourself in a corner with that. And one of the benefits, of obviously like having built-in tools is that the developers themselves have gone through the process. There's a beta process and all that kind of stuff. And I've been burned by this, and I've seen so many people burned by this that they get all into it and then only to realize, oh, well, crap, I didn't realize it was doing this to my image or like that. And you painted yourself in a corner, right? And so, like, to me, I don't know if this is Black Magic kind of like blessing or having some sort of certification program, or
Like a repository.
yeah, something to say that, like, okay, we've run this through these 10 tests and your tool passes because it doesn't, break the image or whatever that definition of that, that kind of thing is. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a programmer, so I'm not sure how that works particularly, but like it just seems like there could be an extra level of QC, if you will, provided by Blackmagic to the third-party developers to kind of ensure that we have more.
See, I would actually, I definitely get where you're coming from. That would be good in a lot of ways, but I kind of disagree just because, one, I don't think they need to be focusing on that. I think I want the opportunity for third-party developers to go hog wild. I want the APIs to be open. I want them to have the opportunity to get in there and break stuff, because that's also where the power is to actually make something innovative. If it comes down to the structures and the APIs get more limited, then there's less we can do with these third-party tools. But like anything else, it's kind of a balance, right? There's always some kind of risk in grabbing these third-party tools and using them. To me, the best way to kind of authenticate them is to see what kind of the more advanced users in the community are saying, and as we've talked about, I think I don't want to be too negative on using third-party tools because I really like them, but to me, there has to be that compelling reason, right?
Yeah.
To get over these hurdles of portability, upgrades, complications with licensing, possibilities of breaking the image, and like we talked about, like you mentioned, way too many clicks for some things, right? It's a big ask for me when I'm going through 1,000 shots to use one of these tools. So if I find a tool that's so essential that I'm going to be reaching for it often in those contexts, I think that's a pretty good endorsement of the tool. And when you get on some of the user groups and talk to some more advanced colorists than me, I think they'll probably say the same thing. If someone that you trust as a colorist is saying, hey, I love this plugin or this DCTL and this is how I use it, it's probably worth your time to check it out. If somebody's getting on a YouTube video and saying, oh, you've been grading wrong your entire life because you haven't been using my plugin that has my own lift gamma gain that's better than lift gamma gain, then you're probably looking at a snake oil salesman.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and I do think the validation. I was just thinking about what like the validation thing that Blackmagic could do, and I guess in a way they're already sort of doing that by releasing, not DCTLs of course, but by releasing their own OFX with every version of Resolve that comes out. Right? They're sort of saying, they're either riffing on some idea that's already out there and kind of incorporating it into their own, or they're kind of saying, no, this is the tried and true tested version that's been through the official process. Try this out. And not to say that.
And the good thing about these tools being kind of compartmentalized, the compartmentalization is a little bit of a downside, right? Because like we said, lots of clicks, right? But if I write an OFX plugin that's absolutely horrible,
you're not gonna screw up
it's
anything
not
else.
going to break Resolve. It's just going to
Yeah.
break itself.
Well, and
You know,
I think the other important thing to realize about this is that you're more like this than I am, and there are clearly a lot of people that are like you. And I think one of the things that it has done is uh, I'm thinking of our friend Brandon Thomas down at TBD Post down in Austin, Texas. Great dude, who I know recently has really dove into his own exploration of programming, right? And I think that ultimately for the, we talk a lot about the industry and the health of the industry and the, where we're going. One of the things that I think is really exciting about this move is that it's getting more people thinking about programming,
Yeah.
tool set design, but more in particularly solving like a way of like kind of solving problems on their own versus waiting for a big company to solve the problems in the way that they want. And it's like, so it's one of those things that like, if you are willing to, if you've identified problems in your workflow, right, that it's not being satisfied by existing tool sets, this is for you, right?
Yeah. And having that possibility, you know, we talked, we did a 2-part series on DIY for Post, right?
Right.
The biggest thing is, can you describe the problem, right?
Yeah.
Can you look at a need? I need this. And then can you actually, describe in detail what it needs to do and how it needs to function? With these capabilities, now it can be made. Whether it's you making it, someone else making it, whatever. We've run into this a lot where we just need a little quick tool just for one thing that we're doing. I can whip up a script or a DCTL just to do that one thing.
Yes, totally. Your blanking was a great version of that. Your pillar boxing one that you have, right? And so I do think that like that kind of thing is really interesting. And I think that there are certain thought leaders. I mentioned Brandon just a second ago, our buddy Kara Hendrickson, Jason Bodak, Cullen Kelly. There are some people that I would say are doing this better than others and are pushing the boundaries. And so if you're looking to mimic or kind of replicate or get into the zone, like look, as you said earlier, like look at who everybody's talking about, the tools that are the most popular. There's probably a reason that they are. Those would be a good place. Let's wrap up this episode because I think we talked about a lot of good stuff, but let's talk about I know that we've made it sound like, well, we stay away from these shy but the reality is that we have some favorites, right? Let's dive into a little bit of those, some favorite tools and just a quick,
there's some that we can, I think, wholeheartedly recommend.
Quick synopsis of why you like it, like kind of the high level, the headline of why you like it, and riff on 3-4 of them. I'll do the same, and we can wrap this one up.
Yeah, in terms of OFX, we've talked about it multiple times in this episode. Neat Video. I don't need it for every shot, but for the shots I need it for, it's so good. And it's customizable. You can go in, you can dial in that's exactly where being able to bring up a whole OFX custom UI really comes into its own, right? It's a tool like Neat Video where I need to draw selections around noise areas and then look at their little graphs and charts and really examine the noise in the image. Neat Video is a perfect use case for an OpenFX plugin because you need that advanced UI. You don't need the tool very often, so those couple extra clicks to use it, the juice is really worth the squeeze there because you only need it for those shots that really need it, and there's not much else that can do it. Another favorite of mine, Film Convert. Of all the generations of Film Convert, because it does fit into a workflow of color management that is already established how I already work. You can go log in, log out with Film Convert, and then you can do all kinds of nice, cool things. It makes a really pretty grain. It has some really pretty kind of film looks, volumetric color transformation, stuff like that. One thing that it does really, really well that I think a lot of people should play with and use, I actually personally don't use it because I've already built my own using built-in tools that I have muscle memory for, but it does a color managed film-like highlight compression. One thing you'll find with a lot of especially in ACES, right? These color management systems were designed for beautiful cinematic footage, which usually is not overexposed with lots of peaky highlights. When you get into crappy run and gun docks and you run them through a color pipeline that is designed for beautiful cinematic footage, sometimes you really need to wrangle those highlights. And Film Convert does a great job of that. Uh, as far as open effects, those are kind of my only ones that I have that I use at this point. I've played with some others, but Film Convert and Neat Video are the only open effects that I have installed on every machine, which also means I'll actually use. DCTLs, I've got a pile of custom ones that I made that I use, but anything made by our friends Carr and Jason Bodak, who have actually recently teamed up together to combine their stores, are really, really good. Really good. And our friend Colin Kelly, his new tool, Contour, is a really interesting look development tool because it functions in a way kind of different than some of these other tools where the gains and the weights of each individual slider vary based on the other ones. So if you push a really high contrast look and then you try to dial in some split tone, how aggressive that split tone is dialed in based on how aggressive your other controls were. So it does kind of, if anything, save you some clicks because it doesn't, you don't have to get in and really fine tune stuff because it kind of adjusts the gains and weights of those tools for you. So those are kind of some of my faves.
Yeah. So I have some of the same favorite ones. I'm going to break them down actually into two categories: some of the OFX and DCTLs. So obviously Neat is great. I have been getting into Contour a lot because and Contour is interesting to me because I think Cullen's one of the smartest guys out there. Obviously, he was very early on in kind of recognizing DCTLs in particular as a way to enhance capability, and I think I think that's obviously he's famous for. And now with Contour, his sort of OFX tool that has GPU acceleration, all sorts of stuff. It's more kind of the next level. But the only reason I point that one out is because this is a case in point where I think when you're identifying and shopping, if you will, Cullen and his team are people that actually really do understand the underlying color science.
And they also use the tools to do real grading.
Not just throwing something on a wall and seeing if it sticks, right? So that is one thing that I really do enjoy, even if I don't use it all the time. One thing I do like about Contour is that I know that there's been a lot of thought into how the maths work about preserving image quality and that kind of stuff. That's one. My other one that I you did not mention, but and admittedly the pricing structure is a little whack, but when it comes to the simplified use of this, when it comes to the general film emulation, I'm a big fan of Filmbox by Video Village. They also make Screen, which is a video player. You might have heard of Lattice, which is like a LUT and kind of transform management tool. That one, and I've tried them. Dehancer, I've tried. Film Convert. Obviously, I really like Film Convert for its grain. I don't use it so much for its profiles because it's like, gotta download this, gotta download that, whatever. And I found the other one I found that is a little confusing is Dehancer, just because it's great, it's good. It just has 19,000 sliders, which is like, hey, I'm moving fast. It's just a lot to look at. So I do like Filmbox. Cower and Jason with some of their DCTLs. I like a lot of DCTLs that do utility type things rather than creative type things. I've not really bought into all the 6 vector stuff and all the plethora of negative saturation tools and all that kind of stuff. They have their point. I see them. It's a couple things that I really like from Cower that are great. PQ limiter, which solves a problem that exists in the world of HDR. That is rounding errors going from YCBCR and RGB when you make PQ enabled stuff. This is a brick wall limiter. You need to do something at 1,000 nits. There's no rounding errors. Bam, it's done. That one is it's worth its weight. I love that one. The other one that have been using a little bit more from them, which is kind of cool, is something called White Balance Checker. And the reason I'll tell you why I'm using that is I work right now. This past couple months, I've been doing a house real estate show that features, I don't know, 15,000 various shades of white walls, and you just get kind of desensitized to it over the course of 1,000 shots. Like what's really white. That's been a really cool. Again, that's from Carl Hendrickson. That's a really 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 good one. And then there's one last one that I love from him that I use all the time. Is what is it called? Fill Shaper. Okay, so one of the really cool things that, when you're developing a shot, you're setting your black level, you're setting your white level. It's that kind of like fill in the gap light sometimes that you can't really emulate with a midtone. Like you sort of can, but when you do it with a midtone,
midtones is too high, shadows is too low.
Right, and then you end up doing this like finger gymnastics where you adjust the midtones and then you go back to lower your shadows or whatever. One of the things I love about the Fill Shaper is that it's just like it feels like real lighting to me, kind of just like pumping up that middle ground in a way that's diffuse enough that kind of does what it says. It fills, right? So that's one of
those cases where it's a great thing to just drop on a node in your fixed node structure with it set to 0. So you can just jump to it and open it on your panel and avoid some of those extra clicks.
Yeah. The other one, it should be top of our list. I don't know why we didn't mention it earlier. Neither one of us mentioned, but it just came to mind, is that if you're looking for a really great set of tools, the time and pixels stuff with Node Omniscope, that will actually obviously works as a separate application, but it does work directly as a plugin inside of Resolve. So if you don't want to have to run on a different computer and go out your video IO or whatever, you can do that. Same thing with some of the time and pixel the other tools they have, like their false color is a great one. The Node display, like there's a lot of good tools from them as well. And then last thing I'll mention is just I don't know. I really, besides the third party ones, we haven't really talked about the built-in ones as being like a thing, but there are a lot of those built-in ones, OFX, that I use.
So I'm gonna stop you here because I want to do a whole episode on kind of non-traditional uses of all of those built-in OFX, because there's tons of great stuff in there, and I think if you kind of open your mind up, there's a lot of non-traditional uses. So I want to do a whole episode on that.
That's a good idea for an episode. I'm glad that we can think on the fly like that. Love that. We'll pencil that one in for another time. Very cool. I mean, so I think that to wrap this up, I think that these tools have a place. I think that you have to kind of manage the click and kind of UI part of it. Hopefully, Blackmagic is still kind of hopefully refining some of their thinking on how to best utilize this. Again, if you're listening, I would love a panel like a doc, like my favorite 3 too. That would be great. But yeah, plenty of tools out there. Vet them, look and see what's popular. Just keep some of the pitfalls of versions and managing some of those things that we mentioned in place. But I definitely think that these tools have a place in a grading workflow. I definitely think that they're empowering a lot of users to think outside the box, come up with solves to problems that they're having, and that in general is only a good thing for the community.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, hey, thanks for checking out this episode. Just as a reminder, you can follow us on YouTube and social media. You can head over to offsetpodcast.com to find episodes as well. And yeah, we'll see you next time for the Offset Podcast. I'm Robbie Carmen.
And I'm Joey Deanna. Thanks for listening.